Hello, this is Lonnie with Rolling O Farm. I'm on my way to check on some ewes that recently had some baby lambs, and I thought it may be a good opportunity for me to try to answer a couple of questions that I often get. First question is, how many babies do goats and sheep typically have at a time? And the second question that I get a lot, is there anything that you can do to increase the productivity of goats and sheep? In other words, so that they have more babies at a time. We're going to deal with both of those questions in this video. Come along. Now first I want you to see, here's a group of first-time mamas, and most of them had a single this time, and you can see the lamb is just a pretty small lamb, nice and healthy. Mama's doing a good job, but it's just a little bit smaller, and she just had a single. Now compare that with this older ewe that has triplets, and you can see that they're all three of them are pretty good sized lambs, and she's doing a good job taking care of them. They're about a day old. So what makes the difference between a ewe having a single lamb or a ewe having triplets? Well, some people would say that genetics are responsible for that. And I don't doubt that genetics may play some part. There may be certain strains of genetics that are more predisposed to having multiples rather than singles. But in my experience, that plays probably a pretty small part in it. You know, goats and sheep are species that typically have more than one offspring. It's more likely for them to have twins than to have singles. And I've owned a number of different breeds of sheep and goats, and all of the breeds that I've ever owned are always more prone to have twins or triplets than they are singles. And so genetics may play a part in it, but it's probably not a very large part. Now, age does play a part in it. A first-time mama is more likely to have a single than twins or triplets. And maybe that's God's way of kind of sparing the inexperienced double duty of having the burden of having to take care of two right away. Sometimes also older ewes or nannies are more likely to have a single. And this is probably just where the productivity curve is starting to taper off a little bit. So when they get around 7 to 10 years old, they may start having more singles than they do twins. So probably the factor that I have noticed having the greatest difference in whether a goat or a sheep has a single or a twin or triplets is the condition of their body when they are bred. If a ewe at the time when she's bred, or a nanny at the time that she's bred, is in poor condition, and what I mean by that is maybe she's malnourished, she's been stressed a lot, she's thin, she's wormy, any of those factors can cause her body condition to be less than optimal. And if it's less than optimal at the time of breeding, I have noticed that she's more likely to have a single than she is twins or triplets. If a ewe or a nanny is in optimal condition when they're bred, they're much more likely to have twins or triplets. However, I have noticed that if one is overly fat at the time when it's bred, it's more likely to have a single or to have problems during the pregnancy or during the delivery. So body condition at the time when they're bred is probably the greatest factor that I've seen in determining whether or not they're more likely to have a single or twins or even triplets or quadruplets. Since body conditioning at the time of breeding is a significant factor, how soon you breed a ewe or a nanny back will also determine many times of how many kids or lambs she's likely to have. If you allow the natural process of breeding to take place, and what I mean by that is you just leave your males in with your females year-round, typically what will happen is they will breed and they'll carry for 5 months. That's the gestation period for goats and sheep, and then they'll lamb or kid. Now, it is possible for them to breed back immediately after lambing or kidding. However, in my experience, that's not typical. Usually what will happen is they will nurse them for about 3 months and then wean them naturally. During that 3-month period, occasionally you'll have one get bred back, but most of the time they do not come back into heat. Now, after they wean, they usually do come into heat, which means they'll breed back after they wean. So your typical time frame from the time that they bred the first time till the time that they bred the second time is usually about 8 months. When this is the case, what I've noticed is a ewe or a nanny that's had twins or triplets will have a greater strain on her because she's having to nurse and feed 2 or 3. And that greater strain often causes her body condition to be a little bit less than one that would just have a single. So if she nurses for 3 months, that whole 3 months she's being pulled down by those multiple lambs or kids nursing on her, which means her body conditioning is probably not going to be as great when she comes back into heat again. And so when she's bred back, there's a greater likelihood that she may have a single the next time. So here's what I've noticed. If they have twins and they breed back within 8 months of being bred the first time, there is a little bit more likelihood that they will have a single rather than twins or triplets the second time. However, the reverse is also true. If they had a single last time, there's not as much demand being put upon them, and the strain is not as great on them, so their body condition may be better when they come into heat the second time, and therefore there's a greater likelihood that they'll have twins or triplets that second time around. So if you want your goats and sheep to produce more twins and triplets, you need to keep them in good body condition at the time of breeding. Now, you can do that in a number of ways. First of all, good management practices. Make sure that they have good nutrition available to them. And so when they are nursing, they may need additional supplemental feeding, such as grain or protein tubs. Make sure they have adequate minerals available to them. Also, make sure that they have a low-stress environment that they're living in. Check and make sure they don't have a heavy parasite load. Parasites can be a particular problem when they are nursing or pregnant, because it really pulls at their system. And so I've got a video how you can check to see if your goat or sheep is having a heavy parasite load, such as stomach worms. I'll try to link that at the end of this video. But something else that you can do is you can pull your ram or your billy out of your flock or herd and allow your ewes to rest from the time that they wean until the time that they breed back. So rather than breeding them back immediately after weaning, you can give them a few months break there. And what will happen is they won't have that additional drain of nursing, and they'll have adequate nutrition, and they'll be able to build up and get in shape. And so when they are bred back a few months later, they're in optimal condition to have twins or triplets. However, if your goal is just to produce more lambs or kids, then you probably need to evaluate the pros and the cons of resting your ewes and nannies between breeding cycles. The cons of resting them is, first of all, you're having to do something with the males during that time. You're having to keep them somewhere separately. You're having to take them out of the herd or the flock, and you're having to put them somewhere else and care for them separately from the rest of the flock, which in one way kind of doubles your workload there, and you have to have more space. Also, rams and billies, there's always a strong will to get back to the girls, and so you're going to have a pretty good confinement system to be able to hold them in. For that reason, some people just sell their breeding rams or billies during that time and then buy new ones when they're ready to breed back. That's the first con. The second con is you're also losing a few months of productivity. In other words, while they're resting, they're not pregnant, they're not nursing, they're just recouping, and therefore that's a couple of months where you're not going to have lambs being grown in that time. So those are the two cons to resting your ewes. The pros is that you're much more likely to have twins and triplets. And you also have well-rested ewes to deal with, or nannies to deal with. And so that's good. And you also probably will have a tighter window on your breeding season. In other words, your lambs and your kids will be more likely to kind of all come in the same time, like in a month or 2 month period of time. And so you can kind of time when you're going to have your lambs and your kids, and that's a convenience. Many times, particularly in cold weather, you can kind of check on them and know that all of them are going to probably come in within this window of time. So the pros and the cons to not letting your ewes and nannies rest is really threefold. First of all, you will probably have more singles than you ordinarily would. This is the method that I use. I leave my rams and billies in year-round, which means they breed year-round, and I do have more singles than I ordinarily would. I average about 1.6 to 1.7 lambs per lambing per ewe or nanny, and it would be a little bit higher than that if I rested my ewes or nannies and gave them time to fully recover. So the second major con is, besides having more singles, you're also going to have ewes and nannies that don't get to be in optimal condition by the time that they're bred back. So they don't just get the recovery time that they would if you pulled the ram or the billy out. And thirdly, it makes your breeding season more spread out. So you are more likely to have lambs or kids really any time of year, and you never really know for sure when you may have one born. And so if you're trying to really monitor them in cold weather or whatever, that can be a little bit more of a challenge. However, the pros of it is that it's very low maintenance. You're not having to take your rams and your billies out and try to keep them somewhere else. Secondly, and probably economically, the biggest factor is you're not losing a few months of productivity every breeding cycle. And that adds up over years. And so if you take a couple of months where none of your ewes or nannies are pregnant, they're not producing, and you do that every breeding cycle over a 5-year period, what you find is that you're actually producing more lambs. Even though you're having more singles, you're actually producing more lambs over a 5-year period than you would if you had more twins and more triplets, but rested your ewes and nannies for a couple of months between each breeding cycle. So that adds up over time. I'm a low maintenance type of guy. I kind of let nature do its thing. And I've tried it. I tried it for a number of years where I kept my rams and my billies out and tried to time when they bred. And I did have more twins and triplets. But I found this to be more economical over the long run, also a lot less maintenance, and it's worked very well for me so far. So the pros of running them together is it's low maintenance. Number two, over a long run, you will have more lambs and kids because you won't have the rest period where you're having months that are not productive, and it's just easier from that standpoint. You do have to know that lambs and kids can be born at any time. So whether you would like to have more control in the timing of your breeding season and also maybe the quantity of lambs produced per ewe or nanny, or whether you would rather have a lower maintenance, hands-off approach where nature kind of takes its course, either way, goats and sheep are going to reproduce fairly quickly. And that's due to the fact that the frequency of their breeding cycles, and then also that they have multiple lambs or kids per breeding cycle. And that's one of the reasons why they've been so popular throughout human history as a livestock, a staple livestock for humans. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate if you give it a thumbs up. Also, subscribe to the channel if you found this helpful for more content like this. And if you're within driving distance of Northwest Alabama and you're looking for goats and sheep, whether it's a starter herd or flock or additional breeding stock, give me a call, see what I have available at the time. And as always, appreciate you watching and happy farming.